Opinionated is proudly supported by Stage and Studio Productions, Gateway Printing, William Jeffries Carpet Warehouse, and Perth Prop and Party Shop.
Hi, I'm Jerry Georgiadis and welcome back to Opinionated. In the last several weeks we've brought you some pretty pressing issues: mass surveillance, mass propaganda, the portrayal of terrorism. It's no different tonight. Tonight we're looking at BRICS. If you don't know what that is, well, stay tuned, stay on show, and it's about Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, an economic bloc, aspirant of taking on presumably the supranational economic powers of the world. We've got 6 guests tonight, 3 crossovers and 3 in-studio guests, and they're experts in BRICS or commentators. But before we move on, I've got to do what I do each week, and that's thank our supporters. And because I don't see too well, and we use a teleprompter here, we are proudly supported by Stage and Studio Productions, Gateway Printing, William Jeffries Carpet Warehouse, Osborne Park, and Perth Prop and Party Shop. Now that's done and dusted. We'll move on. And our guests coming up in the first segment, we've got David Cake, who works as an expert in international internet governance. He's from Electronic Frontiers Australia and the chair. And our crossover guest from Sydney is a BRIC expert, as opposed to BRICS, David Thomas. But we'll go first to a video segment, which will frame our discussion on BRICS.
In 2001, Goldman Sachs predicted that a group of developing and newly industrialized countries could come to dominate Western economies. Since then, those countries have exploded in growth and changed the landscape of world politics. So what are BRICS countries? BRICS is an acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Those 5 countries comprise nearly half of the world's population, a quarter of the world's landmass, and a fifth of the world's GDP. Their combined GDP is nearly that of the United States and growing. A major aspect of their alliance is the formation of the New Development Bank to compete with the IMF and the World Bank. This gives them greater leeway to loan each other and other countries money for development unrestricted by Western influence. Estimates as to their rate of growth tend to vary. Some say that they'll overtake the G7 economies by 2027. Others suggest they might achieve that goal by 2050. This will largely be fueled by the rapid expansion of the middle class and higher GDP per capita. At the forefront is China. In 2013, they passed the $4 trillion mark in trade and passed the United States to become the largest trade country in the world. China's GDP could rival the US's by 2020, as it is already the second largest economy. India's expansion has led to the prosperity of the middle class in recent years. Part of this is due to the fact that 10 of the 30 fastest growing urban areas are located in India. Brazil, which is oil and iron rich, grew to become the 6th largest economy in the world in 2012, briefly overtaking the United Kingdom. However, Russia has seen economic difficulty and a declining population. Recent sanctions and geopolitical problems have increasingly isolated Russia from the rest of the BRICS. The final country, South Africa, was added to the group in 2010, despite having a significantly lower population and economy than any of the others. However, South Africa is the strongest African economy and provides a significant foothold on the continent for China and India. Despite their strong growth, many have said it will be unsustainable as resources are depleted. A growing population will rapidly deplete them and could sabotage the ability to grow at the same pace. Another critique is the overt dominance of China's economy. Without China, the BRICS would have little political clout, and this gives China veto power over BRICS issues. In fact, China's economy alone is larger than the rest of the BRICS combined. Additionally, all 5 countries have mixed records on human rights and ongoing conflicts with their neighboring countries. Regardless, the BRICS have seen significant growth in recent years. Even if they don't become the world's dominant economies, they'll still have far surpassed any expectations from the 20th century. Want to learn about how powerful these countries are on their own? We've covered each of them in these 5 videos. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the upcoming stuff we've got coming your way on Test Tube News. And thank you for watching.
Welcome back to Opinionated. We'll kick off the segment with the Chair of Electronic Frontiers Australia, David Cake. David, let us first ask a little bit about Electronic Frontiers Australia and why your interest in BRICS.
We're an online civil liberties group. We deal with your rights on the internet. And we're interested because I do a lot of work dealing with the evolving way in which governments are trying to control the internet and other telecommunications. And the role of the BRICS countries has been crucial in the last few years, and the way in which they're evolving, their attitudes has changed.
How have the BRICS countries been crucial in the last few years?
Well, in 2012 at the WICET conference, which is part of the ITU, which is the part of the UN.
What's the ITU stand for?
International Telecommunications Union. Though it started out back in the 19th century as the International Telegraphic Union. It's a very old organisation. But it's how governments get together to control telecommunications. And this organisation controlled telephones and controlled satellites and all the way back to telegraphs. And suddenly the internet slipped its way past. There was a lot of feeling that a lot of countries, particularly the BRICS, really wanted to reassert some government control. They sort of proved they had the US and its Western European allies outgunned a little bit, and everyone panicked a little bit.
How have they had them outgunned? In what way?
Well, it's a UN system, 1 vote per country. You've got 5 big regional powers. They together exert an enormous amount of influence. Not just that they have 1 vote, but they exert a lot of influence on their neighbours. They cover a huge proportion of the globe.
They do cover a huge proportion of the globe, 42% of the world's population, 3 billion people, 20% of GDP, gross domestic product. But are they still at a status where they can be considered a legitimate counterpart to what's actually out there, the economical powers?
Well, it's an interesting thing because what we've shown in the last few years is emerged that they have close economic links, but politically the countries differ a great deal. Particularly in their approach to things like freedom of speech and so on over their own people. Brazil, as it turns out, they passed a law called the Marco Civil, which gave a lot of civil rights over telecommunications, institutionalised that government was not firmly in control and had to have other stakeholders involved.
Can you tell us some of those rights that were enabled and enacted and how they could actually then be exported from Brazil?
Well, it's a good question. They set up a system for running the internet in Brazil that involved other groups besides the government, sort of legislatively. They put in some...
To run the system or to oversight it? Because the internet belongs to, presumably, the military-industrial complex of the United States.
Well, no, it doesn't. It was invented by the military-industrial sort of research complex of the United States, but it hasn't been in control of it for a long time. The US, way back in the late 1990s, they sort of handed it over essentially to initially the commercial world, but other groups have kept in, and the role of government in controlling the internet, and not just the US government, but all of the world's governments, has been a subject of constant contention ever since.
So, BRICS, in your view, is it no different in some ways to what exists already out there in terms of the trade blocs that exist, the influences of well, let's argue, the United States of America and the Western world? And is it going to be merely a combative element to them, or is it going to be something totally different to them?
Well, the interesting thing I think about the BRICS, which is shown very much in things like their attitude to the internet and telecommunications, is that they may be a trade bloc who are trying to build up their economic links and cooperate economically, but that doesn't always translate to how they work politically on the ground. They're very different governments. And that big difference in what sort of governments they are, I think they are going to be not the same sort of bloc as, say, for example, even we see the divisions within the European Union, but they are more unified than I think the BRICS are, which are very separate. Separate cultures, separate politics. It's an economic strategy, but I think it'll be a political bloc in the same.
Okay, 2020, 2050, when BRICS is presumably or arguably a lot bigger than what it is now, and it could be, say, 50% of the world's population, of the world's GDP. That's when it will really matter. What do you envisage on the landscape and the great benefits?
Well, the interesting thing about it is it's very hard to say. The interesting thing about it is they are breaking up US and Western European sort of very straight capitalist approach to trade. But on the same hand, do we really want, for example, China is very much it's sort of crony capitalism. It's capitalism as run by the government. Is that something we want more of? Actually, that might be something that's going to become a real problem for us. Brazil, on the other hand, very different country.
Some actually see China as a predominant player here and the great influence, and will it take complete control of BRICS, or is BRICS China and allies?
I don't think China will ever take complete control of BRICS, because as China starts to exert its control, the others will fall away. I think it's an alliance of convenience right now. Brazil does not have, while Brazil and China are cooperating to, break up a system of US and Western European control, then they're allies. But as soon as that, China starts to become big enough that it doesn't need that help, I think they will drift. They will start to exert their independence.
On that note, David, thanks for your insights and your thoughts and a little bit of education for our viewers. We'll head now to Sydney, crossover, and we've got David Thomas, who's a BRIC expert, as opposed, as I said initially, to a BRICS expert. He's an entrepreneur and thought leader. And David, how are you?
Great, thanks, Jerry.
David, you've heard from the other David just here, our in-studio guest, and you've seen the little video clip. What's your views on BRICS or BRIC, as you argue?
Well, yeah, let's just go back a little bit. As it was said in the segment there, that the BRIC acronym was invented in 2001 by a chap called Jim O'Neill, who at the time was head of economic research at Goldman Sachs. I know Jim very well, actually, and he joined Goldman Sachs just after the events of 9/11, and he decided that he needed to put his team to work to think about the world beyond America. He thought that 2001 and 9/11 was a particular tipping point, and so he started to look at big long-term trends and how things would change. And he came up with this idea, BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. It was never a 10-year view, it was never a 20-year view, it was a 100-year view. He was trying to sort of take big, deep sort of bets in terms of how things would change. But the way the world is today, of course, we've only been into it for 10 years. We've already moved on and decided that that was good, but now what's next? But he always had this big picture in mind.
David, has it been good so far? You said we've already into it now 10 years. Where are we actually at in terms of its influence and its benefit?
Well, as you said, they're already making a big contribution to GDP. They represent most of the, over half of the world's population, and they also represent a lot of the landmass in the world. So far, there's been political issues. No one ever expects these things to go up in a straight line. China has perhaps exceeded expectations, and Russia and Brazil, to some extent, have disappointed. India's been a bit slower than expected. But as I say, this is, we're looking at 100-year cycles here.
So where do you actually envisage in 100 years BRICS will be? What is the landscape in 100 years?
We will live in a much more multipolar world without the dominance of a single country like the US, which has been the dominant force for the last 100 years, 80 years. And I think the world will be a lot better place if there are a lot more countries, a lot more cultures, and a lot more people involved in making global type decisions.
David, can you see the possibility, many would argue the probability, that the United States is a power of great capacity, a supranational imperialist power to many, can undermine the BRICS process? Can it?
Well, of course it can. It can certainly it can slow things down, but I don't think it can slow down one fact about the BRICS. And I've actually got you a little chart to show you, because I'd like to just quickly flash this up. It basically looks at the world in terms of land, people, and capital. So you can see there that you have countries with land of over 2 million square kilometers, countries with a population of 100 million or more, and countries with a nominal GDP of 600 billion or more. And if you look at that, those three things, and you look at what sits in the middle, you've got 4 BRIC countries plus America. And so I don't think any of that can change. So America can't really undermine the progress of the BRICS in those 3 areas because they have abundance in those three economic inputs. And one quick point to make, Jerry, about Africa, because as you said, I'm a BRIC expert, not a BRICS expert. Now, Jim O'Neill's idea was BRIC, and he never dreamt that this investment idea would become a meeting of the BRIC leaders as they started to sort out economic, political, and geopolitical issues. And the first leader of the BRICS was actually just the 4 BRIC leaders, but later on they invited South Africa to join them. Now, when you look at my chart, you can see you can't see South Africa anywhere. It doesn't have enough land, it doesn't have enough people, it doesn't have enough capital, but it is, of course, the gateway into continental Africa, which represents about 56 countries. And so Africa as a continent.
David, let me ask one final question. Do you see the currency of nations making vulnerable the BRICS? What about nations with fragile currencies, for instance, Brazil and Russia?
Well, I see these are short-term issues which will get resolved in the next 5 to 10 years. And I see the BRICS story as a much bigger, longer-term issue.
What about the domestic issues of some of these BRICS countries? Do they affect the long-term plan?
Yes, well, take Brazil, for example. Brazil is in recession at the moment with a very unpopular president and massive overreach in terms of debt and infrastructure with the Olympics and everything that they're dealing with. And in the short term, Brazil is struggling, and it's probably going to take 3 to 5 years for them to get through this. The real has been massively devalued, and there's lots of short-term problems with Brazil. But I come back to my chart and say Brazil has an abundance of land, people, and capital, and if they can overcome, as they will, the shorter-term political and economic issues, Brazil will be a great and important influence in the world in the next 10 to 20 years.
Will it be trying to achieve this with breakneck speed or indenture of its population in terms of cheap labour, or will BRICS actually ensure fairness and equity?
I'm very confident that they will ensure fairness and equity.
How so? What are the protective factors to that?
Well, they have a vast common interest, the 4 of them. Sorry, I didn't catch that.
The protective factors, you're talking about a common interest, the common interest being that they're combative now with the economical affairs of the world, the rest of the world, in trying to overwhelm the trade blocs that are subsuming them. But what about the protective factors of their own populations, that they don't indenture their own populations to cheap labour?
Yeah, no, they've all got that challenge. That the gap between the rich and the poor is a major problem in all 4 countries, particularly Brazil, China, India. These are problems that they have to work their way through. But what they've all discovered is that if they can create growth, if they can build and grow their countries, they create jobs, they create wealth, and they create a much more harmonized society which can go forward. But as David previously said, they all have very difficult political systems, very different very different interests, but as a group, they're incredibly powerful going forward.
On that note, David, I'd like to thank you for your expertise, much valued. We'll be going to a commercial break and coming back with a couple more guests.
Opinionated is proudly supported by Stage and Studio Productions, Gateway Printing, William Jeffries Carpet Warehouse, and Perth Prop and Party Shop.